All right, Barter, what do we want to talk about? Let's talk about culture. Let's talk about the fact that work should be as close as it can be to a family, but in sales and revenue, it's always so cutthroat.
So,
Maybe that.
man, it's funny, right? Like, so I think it's like the most cliche thing that a sales manager or a VP of sales can say is like, particularly during the interview process or when they're talking about the company, is
Yeah.
like, man, we're like a big family here. You know,
People cringe when they hear that,
they
but let's
do
break
cringe
that
when they
down.
hear that, and it's like, this is not at all like a family. I'm on a PIP, and he said he was going to fire me if I didn't turn this around. And you can't fire your family, so it's not like a family at all. So, like, why did I think this would be like an interesting topic? I mean, it feels pretty damn close at Rocket Shipping, as close as I think you can get at a job to it being more of a family environment. I mean, good example would be Maggie's on maternity leave, and I've seen her kid like 3 times, right?
She was just
Not,
here right now.
yeah, not because she sent pictures over, but because she's gone into the office with the baby and gone and hung out while she's on
Yeah.
maternity leave because everyone rocks with each other, man. Everyone gets along. Everyone's like legitimately invested in each other. And I don't think that you can have that everywhere. I think there's probably a bunch of variables that lead to Rocket being able to have that kind of environment compared to other places that I've worked at where it didn't. I'd like to get your take on it before mine because it's your company. I'm just head of revenue. You're the founder and CEO. But it is interesting.
My take on it, and if you're listening to this, welcome back to another episode of Rocket Revenue, where we talk about how to open source we open source how we're trying to create predictable, repeatable revenue. I'm going to do that again. And if you're listening to this, welcome back to another episode of Rocket Revenue, where we open source how to create and how we are creating predictable, repeatable revenue. Today, we've been diving into the topic, and you've heard some already of Barter and I going back and forth about culture, how to create it, and the old cliche of, we're like one big family that you hear in sales. My take on it is, you spend more time working than you do with your family most careers. Like the amount of hours you're going to spend with your colleagues and working at a company is more than anything, probably besides sleeping, if you're working 40, 50, 60 hours a week. And in revenue, particularly, you work more than 40 hours a week. When you're not working, you're thinking about working. You're thinking about your quota. You're thinking about the next deal. And so even when you're not at work, you're thinking about it, and it may consume you there. So why not work somewhere that feels like a little bit like family, or even a lot of it like family? Barter, you had talked about you can't fire your family. Well, some people do. Some people cut their
That,
family out.
and I've thought about making a TikTok about that like a million times. Like we've talked about a couple people in my family. Funny enough, one of them, won't say their name because they've
Yeah.
since changed it, but they had at their peak over 100,000 followers on TikTok. They fired me. I haven't talked to them in like 7 years. I've talked to a boatload of people that worked for me or I worked for every week, all the time. They hit me up for advice, like personal advice about family, starting a family. I guess once you've
Yeah.
got 5 kids, you become like the pro, I guess. I don't know. I don't know what the hell I'm doing. But like I try to provide some advice on it. And yeah, there's people that I've worked with. Almost all of my friends either came from when I was a battle rapper or from sales.
Yeah.
Essentially all of them, besides a few that I'm still cool with in high school. And I turned 40 in like less than 2 weeks. So like those kind of dwindle a little bit too when you're past 20 years of like being in math class together.
Yeah.
So I think it depends on the work environment for sure. It depends on the people that get hired there for sure. And like, I won't even say are they like-minded, but like, do they get along and do they at least have similar like goals? Doesn't even have to be interest. I mean, there's a bunch of people at Rocket that I get along with that I don't have like wildly similar interests or anything
Yeah.
like that. I tell people all the time, like I've had a few people, it's funny, I'm on live now. I've had a few people on TikTok live hit me up and be like, yo, I have sales experience in tech sales and freight broker experience. Like, can we talk? And like, I don't even think I've told you about this. Like, I've talked to like two or three of them. I've had like half-hour long, like little very preliminary interviews, like with them, and
Yeah.
it's kind of hard to explain the fact that it's wildly different here than what they've maybe experienced elsewhere. I don't. I Why do you think that is? Like, you've worked at places. I'm sure it was a lot different than where it is here. You started it here. You brought the people in. You've hired everybody. What do you think is the big difference?
I think that, and this isn't to my credit, this is just how I was raised, and this is just who I am. That I'm just willing to take the risk of riding too close to the line of friends and family, and then
Yeah.
having to deal with the fallout of, like, I've fired 7 or 8 people since I started the company, and I treated them the same as I do everybody at Rocket, and I tried to make it a family. It makes it exponentially harder to fire people.
Yeah.
And I think that that's why corporate culture is like, I don't want to deal with that ick, and I don't want to have to confront that. And so instead, I'm going to protect myself or the company against that and keep it more rigid and more corporate. We're not friends, just in case you don't perform and I have to fire you. I'm just willing to ride the line of, like, I'm building Rocket along with all the other Rocketeers. This is my, like, career. This is my life's mission so far. I might as well enjoy the people I'm with and treat them like friends and family as much as I can. And I don't hire a homogenous culture, that's for sure. We've got young people, we got Gen Z all the way up to 50 something, and we've got Midwest to Florida to Kansas to East Coast, West Coast. But the people that end up staying are the ones that end up, feeling like they fit in as well. And we're creating, I guess I would call it diversity, right? Diversity of thought and opinion rather than diversity of just, identities.
Yeah.
But it's created more of a family atmosphere. And I think that I'd only attribute that to, that's just how I am as a person. I'm very personable, and I am willing to risk riding the line of friendship and being the CEO, and having that be the culture, even though that may mean fallout of friendships if I fired somebody. And in fact, I fired one of our sales reps who works here today and then rehired him, and he's one of my best friends. So, like, I'm willing to ride that line, and we them boys still. I fired him, and then I rehired him a year later because it was actually my fault. And it still works, but I'm willing to ride the line and risk it, and I think it's worth it.
I have a hard time like working at a place where I can't consider the people I'm working with like be a friend at the
Mm-hmm.
same time, which is weird because like I've done that as like a top performing individual contributor salesperson, and it's
Yeah.
easier and it's probably more authentic than like when the other half of my career I've been the boss of the salespeople, and it's
Yeah.
like, yeah, we're boys. It's like, yeah, we're boys, but like, I don't know, are we? Like, or is it just because like let's keep the boss on our good side? And like, I'd say it's probably more of the first one because there's people that worked for me years and years ago that like I still again talk to like once or twice a week, and get along with them. And I think that I always looked at it when I was building a sales team, even back when I was in door to door. It was like, I just want to find people that I really rock with and I want to see succeed. And I'm like genuinely invested in their success, and I can like have a good time with them also. And then
Yeah.
like it makes me work harder to make them successful. And
Yep.
I know that I think when it comes to like, yeah, you don't fire your family or anything, right? But yeah, but if you view them kind of that way, or at the very least, you view them like somebody that you're really like you're friendly with, at the very least, if you put all of that effort into them and you did everything that you could, and you laid out expectations, you showed them how to do it,
There it
and
is.
and then they don't do it, and you're like you're working harder than you ever have because now you're more invested in them. Yeah, there might be a chance that you have to part ways, but like I guess on that side of things, you, you better have done the work, or else it's disingenuous. But if you did, then they should feel kind of the same way of like, I let them down.
They
Like
still
they
go out for
did all
beers on
this work
Thursday
and I
night.
didn't, because that's often the
Yeah.
case, right? Like it's rare. I mean, man, I'll even say the dude's name because it is a positive. Bob Cleveland at Fleetmatics. This dude's got to be mid 60s to 70s at this point. He had some good months here and there, And he had a lot of bad months here and there. He was a SDR there. He pounded the shit out of the phones, man. He was never a problem. Always a nice guy. Always willing to help somebody if they ask for help. And I told everybody, Bob's never getting fired. It's never going to happen. Bob comes in, he busts his ass, he tries as hard as he can. I'm not firing him. I'm sorry. Anyone that's meeting me way more than halfway, I'll do everything that I possibly can to keep you here if I can afford to keep you here. Now, keep in mind, that is a different model. We didn't have a target that was based on the reps that we had. If I hired more reps, my target didn't go up. It was based on the target for the year. So I could afford to do that in that model. And maybe I couldn't do that in a lot of today's tech sales models and a lot of other models. But in that model, the way I looked at that, I was like, no, man, like, you could call them a culture hire, but like a lot of times culture hires, I hate that shit too. A lot of times culture hires are ones that aren't working hard, and they're like leaning on the fact that like, oh, but I've got this bubbly personality that I use to distract the actual workers from doing real work. So I'm a personality hire. All right, well, I'm a personality firer. I will fire you immediately for that bullshit. But if you're busting your ass every day and really trying, and like you're a good fit, you're low maintenance, you're not causing problems, you're a net positive to the team, that's a different story. And it is tough though, because you can't always do that shit. Like you can't. Like it's not possible depending on the way targets.
It's not always scalable, but like I do think that, part of, and I was thinking more about while you were talking about what makes it unique at Rocket, why it does feel like a family. And like, I've seen plenty of LinkedIn posts of like, it's a championship team, not a family. Yes, it is a championship team, but like part of it, and I think this is unique to Rocket in the fact that that's how I lead, is that you have family members, right? You don't get to pick them, and they don't always agree with you on politics, culture, social issues, religion, all of that, right? And then you go to work and you're not allowed to talk about anything that you believe in or who you are. And so everybody just doesn't really know, but then maybe thinks they know. And at Rocket, we just talk about everything. Nothing's off limits. And so it's more like a family because, me and my sister don't agree on all of the political spectrum, but we're family. And so we love each other. And I think that most corporate cultures shut out anything that could be controversial ever since cancel culture, right? And instead, people don't open up about anything except for like, I have some kids, or I do this after work, or maybe they like have a company party. Whereas at Rocket, we just share everything about who we are. And like, we have all kinds of people at Rocket that have different opinions about everything, but we know generally everybody that works at Rocket today is a good person. I can't say that like across all of time, but today at Rocket, everybody that I employ, I think they're generally like good people who have good intentions and work extremely hard. That's kind of the baseline for working here. But also, we know a lot about each other. I know Maggie's baby, and she brings them to the office. And I know Tommy's got a baby on the way, and Claudia's got a baby on the way. But also, I know there's people at Rocket that want babies that don't have them yet. I know everything because we're open with each other. And I think that creates a culture like a family while still being able to ride the CEO line of like, hey, I need effort still, and I need results, obviously. But we've been able to make that happen. So I'd rather ride that line.
Yeah, so it is funny, championship team versus family. So I think I'm a Celtics fan, right? I got this hat 16 years ago now. Jesus, that was the last time.
But yeah.
That was the last time we had a banner, because there's 17 on here. I grew up, it was always 16 rings, and then we got 17 in 2008. Paul Pierce, Kevin Garnett, Rondo, Big Baby, like these dudes still hang out 16 years later after winning that ring. Like, are they family? I don't know, man. Probably pretty close, really, But then you could also be like, yeah, but remember when Ray Allen demanded a trade and no one would talk to him for like a decade after that happened on those Celtics teams? Yeah, there's that too. So I think that it's kind of a mix of both, right? Like, because there's a level of competition to it, friendly competition. You're also competing together against your actual competition, like your competitors, the other solutions that are out there and everything. But It's an old thing that I learned from 2020 companies, which was a door-to-door place that I worked at 15 years ago. And they had these little goal cards, and on the back of them it said, "I will become successful as I make others become successful," which is a pretty good way of looking at things. I think particularly in sales, if you're an individual contributor but you want to move up, or at the very least you want to be valued higher in the company and potentially make more money, is yeah, okay, you're doing well, you're killing it. What have you done in terms of helping others? Have you helped them kill it also?
Yeah.
I've had an example of that at Panadog, and you know probably who I'm talking about because we talked about the guy a lot. He's account executive
Yeah.
over there. I won't drop his name because I feel like I say this, and sometimes it might come off as a negative, but it's not. Our VP of sales at the time looked at him, who was a wildly high performer, by the way, like went well over his target all the time, crushed deals, prospected as an AE, did everything, but he didn't have the warmest personality when you talk to him, you know. He wasn't an ass by any stretch. He was just like, that's kind of how his disposition was.
Yeah.
So if you only got to know him surface level, then your take on him would have been like, man, this guy is just out for himself. He's like, and he isn't helping others. And sure, he hits his target, but I don't want him working with a lot of our top SDRs because I don't think it's fair and I don't like the guy, right? Is not my take, but our old VP of sales take. Now, if you really got to know him and you got to know everyone else on the team and you dug a little bit below that, you'd see, oh, wow, everyone that's been promoted here from SDR to AE is directly because of that account executive. He made a personal investment in them when they didn't have to, started working with them, going to lunch with them, becoming friends with them, and investing in their career when it actually made no sense for him to do it, because when SDRs get promoted to AE, the AE loses that SDR's pipeline. It now goes to the AE because now they're self-sourcing their own deals. And Mike Fusil, I've mentioned a million times, worked at Fleetmatics, used to do the same thing. If he saw an SDR that was doing well or started to do even remotely well, he'd buy him lunch and start to talk with him. And sure, he might want the bookings because back then you could assign the booking to the person, but he was investing in them and working with them. And that really does help the culture a lot, is like, are you a mercenary or are you someone that's a little bit more long-term and big picture? Because it's short-sighted to be that selfish. If you want to be really selfish, helping others actually helps you hit your goal more.
Yeah.
So when people say that to me, they're like, oh man, you really are helping people out. Well, yeah, I always want to move into a leadership role wherever I'm at. First off, I do like to help. I like to pay it forward. But if you could kind of see the big picture, am I going to make more money or less money if I'm helping everyone that I'm working with? I become more valuable. I'm probably going to be worth more money to the company. I'm going to have better job security with the company. So there's so many things that are in it for just me. There's an argument.
Self-interest is good.
Yeah.
That's what I think that people just get away from, is you should always have your own self-interest when you're working for an employer, right?
Yep.
And then it's my job to figure out what that self-interest is, because I've learned, and I'm like a puppy dog. I just trust everybody has good intentions, and I've always just trusted people naturally. And it's burned me several times, but I'm still better for it. And I like that I can still have that disposition, and I'm always going to go with that. And I've put people around me that don't have that disposition, and they help me. But if you can just trust that people will act in their own self-interest, and then second, you talked about that account executive to others maybe seem like a different disposition, but you knew him, right? Or if you got to know him, that's what's going wrong with corporate culture. Nobody gets to know anybody.
Yep.
They don't know what the human behind the performance is, or et cetera. Or if someone seems awful, maybe they're going through something. At Rocket, we've uniquely been able to have a pretty open culture. People know when people are struggling and generally what it's about. And people know when people are succeeding and generally what it's about. Second thing, I was thinking about this while you were talking too. Jeff Bezos wrote a book, or maybe they wrote it about his company, Amazon. It's called The Happiness Advantage. I don't think he wrote it, but it was about Amazon. Happier companies make more money and have higher revenues. And they're like, why is that? It's not actually because people are happy, right? It's because happiness is a fleeting feeling, right? It's just happiness despite circumstances would be joy, but it's not the cause of the success. The cause of the success is that they're all a good culture. And because they're a good culture and open with each other and everybody understands what's going on and they want to win, everybody wants to win. No one enjoys losing. They all wanted to win together for the long-term goal, which made them happy, which then showed up as the score of like people who are happy do better at companies, but it's actually like one layer deeper. Why are they happy? It's because of the other behaviors. If you take that and then you say, hey, championship teams, I mean, when I was in high school, won a state championship in basketball my junior year. That group of friends was closer than any other friends I had because of the success we enjoyed together and all of the bonding that happened. And if you're looking at the long term, which I think is an advantage for Rocket because we're 3.5 years, almost 4 years old, we're looking long term. There's almost no one works at Rocket that's like, I'm just here until I find my next job, right?
Yeah.
It's like, hey, this might be a career. I'm going to test it out. If you're looking long term, happiness comes from winning. Winning only happens if you have everything going exactly right because startups are so hard. And it's all a feedback loop of we want to win long term, and we actually know who each other are. I know Troy's family a little bit. I've met Troy's wife. I've met a lot of my employees and coworkers, spouses, and we have Christmas parties and summits, and all those things are not just like selfishly designed to have good culture. It's just what I enjoy. And by effect, it works out pretty well for Rocket.
So that probably is part of it, right? If if you genuinely like, because I've done little summits with spots where like the CRO was like a robot, and like you could tell like they read that they should do these, right? And it's like it doesn't come off as genuine. People are waiting for them to go to bed so they can actually hang out. You know what I mean? Like, and versus like, nah, I really wanted to be here. Like if I had the option between the two and you told me that like it wouldn't affect work whatsoever, I'd still want to go. I'd want to be there. I'm invested in it. But, dude, everything's a transference of certainty, emotion, the whole nine. I think when it comes to culture, I think it's the same concept. But you mentioned something, and I agree with it a lot, which is like you got to get to know people outside of like surface level. I learned this from old manager in 2008. We used to have a team night every Thursday, right? We'd go out every Thursday. And when I first started there, I was like, man, with this cornball stuff, I ain't going. Probably for the first month, I never showed up. I was like, I'm here to work, and then I'll go do my own thing after that. But like I already worked 1 million hours door to door. I have to wear a suit and tie, and it's the summertime in Florida. I'm done. I'm ready to go home now. And she said, you build your team in blue jeans. You're not going to build your team in the office. So when you're building it up, and when you're getting like the more that you get to know these people and work, the better that you're going to be able to lead them. You know, when you sit down and you just set goals, there's a big difference between just setting a monetary goal and setting a monetary goal, and you're like, okay, well, I know why that's your monetary goal, because you've been trying to have a kid for 3 years with your wife, and you haven't been able to, so you've decided to adopt. This is a real story. And you have a monetary goal because you know that if you have to go above your typical expenses to be able to afford to do this. All right, well, now that I know that, and you know that I know that, and we've got a plan in place, what are the chances that you're going to hit that goal, higher or lower? Higher. You know, and I might work a little bit extra harder. I definitely will, because it's one of the greatest things that you can do, in my opinion, is adopt a kid. I've got 5, all my own, right? You know, but I definitely, I think that it's solid. It's one of the most solid things that you can do. Like, I'm going to be a little bit more invested in trying to help as well. We're all running into the same direction, but it's gone beyond the surface level. It's funny, some of these great salespeople that become managers, like they learn how to do a great discovery in sales. And you don't do a great discovery by just finding out like what the problem is and then moving on.
And then immediately pitch.
You pull that thread. But then when they become managers, like they never do a discovery on the people that they're managing, and they never really get to know them. And they expect everyone to be wired the same way that they're wired, and that's not the way that the world works. Everyone's motivated.
Just like your family members are not wired, even though you share genetics with them, there can be like me and my sister couldn't be more different in some areas.
The person that I am most genetically like is the person that I am least like of everyone that I've ever met in my entire life.
So then if you take that concept and then you go from a CEO perspective or a VP of sales, like if you have a team and you want to get the best out of them, every problem is a people problem. Every problem in my entire business is a people problem, right?
Yep.
And so if I want to have fewer problems, I need to have better people, or I need to, my job is to architect an environment that people can be successful in. That's literally my only job these days. And that's harder than it seems. But if every problem is a people problem, and you figure out the people, and the people want to not only support the company, but also like the individuals around them, and they're all, a group of people shared suffering going for a common goal, you likely will win, even if you don't have the best people in the industry, right? There might be people that are more experienced or have a higher work or like work bandwidth and can do 12-hour days with no problem. And, they don't have anything going on in their personal lives. But a team that has all of those problems can still win if they're all rowing the boat in the same direction. I think that culture is cliche, but the most important fundamental part of any company. And second, I don't think good talent stays at companies that have bad cultures, right? And I think that like I hedge more on that than anything, because I want talented people to want to work here to start, to get them. And then I want them to see the 10-year vision and want to stay around this group of people, so that even if they had other opportunities in the market, they're like, no, like I really enjoy what I do. Why would I leave? And lastly, if we all win, then everybody gets compensated the way they need to anyways.
I think a good barometer for this, or test for this, was we had Good Friday off as a company, right? But there was a meeting that was still on the calendar. We do like a morning meeting, and I hopped on there just like, oh, well, I mean, I'm already working on stuff for sales org. I'll hop in there just to see if anyone's in there. And both of the sellers on our team were in there. And it was like at the office, by the way. They weren't even doing it remote. I was like, guys, it's a holiday. Like, you could be off. They weren't in there because they're like, oh, I've just got to make this money. They could have done the same thing at their house, right? They like coming into work. Like,
Yeah.
they like being there. And I think that's probably a large part of the reason that like companies like, like Google and Amazon, a lot of these like massive tech, like behemoths, have like all of these really cool things at work, not just like a ping pong table, but
Yeah,
like
their
crazy,
campus is cool.
over the top shit. And it's because like, oh, well, we want them to be here even like after work hours, because then maybe they'll get some work done. And we want them to look at this like it's not just a place where they clock in and they clock out. And I don't think that you did that by design. I think that you did that because like, I mean, shit, I've had meetings where it's like, yeah, man, I'm going to be in a second. I just got to finish up this game of bags with Gabe. I'm like, all right, fuck it. It's working. They're showing up to the office and everything like that. And I think there might be a fine line, but the reality is I think every sales place I've ever worked at where the culture was really fire and I really liked it, there kind of wasn't a fine line. It was insanely blurred and stepped and stomped on at all times. And
it's high risk to do that.
Yeah.
It's high risk to do that, because in today's world, you can open yourself up to all kinds of liabilities if you're just too open about everything. It's very high risk.
I can tell you.
But I'm willing to risk that. I'm like, if I'm going to risk all my finances to start a startup, why would I do it? And then like say, hey, work is strictly work. I don't want you to discuss anything, and I don't want you to have fun. Google is the greatest company that ever was created for like revenue and like business model. And they they did it on purpose. Obviously, they just wanted their people to work 80 hours a week.
Yep.
But the same principles, I didn't do that on purpose because half my team's remote. We started during COVID anyways, but that's just what I enjoy. So I was like, well, if I enjoy it and they enjoy it, then I'll find the right people that want to do the same thing that I want to do, which is build a huge company, not because we want to make money, although we're going to make a bunch, but because we want to build something and we enjoy the shared camaraderie of suffering. And for some reason, we all enjoy it, even though it's not an easy thing to do.
So how do you do it, right? So you think about it on the sales side, at the very least.
Tactically.
I think one thing is like targets have to be attainable, because you're not going to enjoy the work culture if you're constantly like wildly stressing your target.
Yeah, if you're always on the verge of failure, you never enjoy the success because you know the next quarter's coming.
Dude, I can tell you, whenever the culture is, when I think it's the hottest is when I'm doing the best, because then I'm pumped, right? Like I'm like, man, this is the best place ever. Like we're crushing it. So like targets.
Well, that can be engineered though, right? So long as like you have great financials and you know what the targets need to be, if you can make them attainable, it's the same thing as like Pavlovian conditioning. Like if you can make it attainable, then they enjoy it the whole time.
Yep.
I mean, that's like a crude example of, the dog drooling, but if you didn't make it attainable, then intermittent reinforcement is what most people use. And that is the most effective to control human behavior, but the least enjoyable. To just be like, hey, you get it, but then I'm going to change your target. And then if you go above, and then you get this bonus, but then I'm going to change the number again. Eventually people burn out on that. You have to be able to engineer an environment that's like, hey, it's attainable, it's understandable, and it's translatable to where, like, if they succeed, they feel good, they succeed more.
A lot of tech sales places do that. They'll lay out their vision for the year for targets. They get rolled out. Funny enough, sometimes not in January, sometimes even in February, yet like it's for the year. So like, how does that work? Like we're already 2 months in. And then if they overshoot the target, it's rare that they'll correct it, right? If they say, hey, we need each rep to do $100,000 every quarter, and they're all doing 50 after 2 quarters, they don't always adjust that. They might just, and if they do adjust it, probably not as much as they could have, where it would make sense. They overshot. Fleetmatic's good example of that. Like I lost director of the year the last day of the year. So narrow second place. I hit target 1 month out of the year. No one hit target. So like I looked great. We did crush it, but the targets were too high. They were just like, it got to the point where it was like, hey, we can't have exponential growth every single year. At this point, everyone's heard of tracking. Everyone's got it. Yeah. We're rip and replace now. The way that we could grow 2 years ago, we're not going to grow the same way this year. We're still growing, just not the same route. And another example would be other tech sales place that I worked at. I won't say the name on this one for reasons once I say it. Became $1 billion company. We crushed target the first quarter, and then the CRO adjusted the target immediately for the next quarter and raised it. But when they announced the targets for the year, they didn't announce the quarterly target. They told us all the targets. Hey, if this team hits all of these targets, we're good. And then we crushed it for the first quarter, and then they're like, oh, okay, well, now we're going to adjust it. They get greedy. And it's usually like, I do think part of it is like, did leadership really sell? I think what helps you is that, like, I tell people this whenever I talk to them about, like, Rocket, it's like, Gabe really can do this shit. Like, he can really sell. He likes to sell. He tries to find ways to free up bandwidth to be able to sell. A lot of times your CEO, your CRO, like, maybe they sold for a little bit, hated it, and got out of it, and they never plan on going back, and they just don't have instincts. They don't understand, like, just in their gut, like, how it works. And if you keep raising the target, it doesn't raise production, because if you're paying...
We could have done that this year. Yeah. I mean, we crushed Q1 target, and it looks like for the rest of the year it's going to be just easy sailing.
But the good news is that our sellers don't view... They used to, right? Like a year ago, they viewed it as, well, I don't get paid on meetings that I book, but my target is the meetings that I book, so I'm worried about the meetings that I book. And that was all I'm worried about, or they were worried about, right? So, like, they'd book anything. And this is a problem with tech sales in general, is that a lot of SDRs are comped on meetings they book, and so are their manager, and it becomes this massive, like, rift between them and the account executives. But we changed that where it's like, no, I want you guys to start thinking about the money that you're going to make on that deal and worry about the commission and focus on that, to the point where we don't need to raise targets. As insane as this sounds, we probably don't even need targets, because they're worried about they see the money that they can make, and it's way more than they thought that they were going to make. And now
we're giving them the vehicle to be successful in it, right? And so they still have to do all the work. Yeah. But I also think if you don't have the right core values, you can't have the right culture. And this is like directly to your point of changing targets. One of our core values is integrity. If I went through all the books and said, this is the amount that I think we can grow this year, and I'm an aggressive entrepreneur, I want to double every year too, or more than double. But if I know what we need to hit, and then we're hitting that and then some, and then I just say, oh, without hiring more sellers, let's move the target up because I know they can, then I don't have the integrity. I got greedy, right? Now, if I hire more sellers, the target changes because it's per seller and what I think each one can produce. Right. And I'm going to hire more sellers. Yep. We're going to grow. And I'm doing other things that I can't talk about on this podcast yet, but lots of things are happening. I'm aggressively going to blow our number out of the water as far as what we're going to accomplish this year. But I'm not going to go change the sales reps' pay structure because I can, even though it would have been reasonable in any, tech company to be like, oh, we crushed it. Actually, that target wasn't right. Let's readjust. Instead, I'm like, hey, they're doing the right activity. Keep doing it. Make your money. Now, when we talk about making money too, like if your culture isn't open enough to be like everybody wants to make a bunch of money, then what are you doing? Like, I think people don't talk about money enough too. You need to make money. And that's the rat race that exists. Now, I am, a Christian man and like, hey, I got to take care of my family first, right? I got to provide.
Yep.
My wife works alongside me at Rocket, so don't get the wrong message with that audience. But I got to provide. Everybody at Rocket has to provide for their families. That's the way I look at it. Is through that lens. And if that isn't the goal to have them provide for their families, not even in like a way to just make it by, but to like, if everybody at Rocket in the next 3 years is debt free and doesn't worry about personal finances, and like they go out to the grocery store, there's two measurements I use. If you go to the grocery store and you just give them your card when you get to the register and you just say, yep, here you go, scan it, and you don't look at the screen at how much everything costs, you're doing well. And if you go to a restaurant and you just say, what's the best thing? What do I want today? Instead of looking at the prices, that's where I want everybody at Rocket. That's financial freedom. And I know that that's like a, just a measurement, but I think about that daily, weekly, as I try to figure out how to pay everybody and do the bills and the finances. But that's the mission, is to impact people. Money impacts people to that extent.
I won't work with a salesperson if they don't have one of these two motivating factors, preferably both. One is like wildly money motivated. They want to make as much as they can. That's why they're in this. This ain't the easiest job. When you start brand new, you're cold calling. No matter what sale you're doing, for the most part, you're cold calling. And
for an extended period of time, probably.
When you're brand new at it and you don't have confidence with it yet, it ain't fun. It's tough to get going on. You got to be pretty money motivated, I would say, or someone that has like a wild competitive streak where maybe they're like, hey, I've got enough. I'm happy. I don't need to buy a bunch of extra stuff. I'm living within my means, no problem. I don't really care that much about money. It gets worth less every day anyways, what we talk about. But they're like, but I'm super competitive. Like, I want to win. I want to be the best. This is why sales companies hire a lot of ex-pro athletes, college athletes, because it's like, hey,
remember, it's always on the resume.
Yeah, remember how you were running back for the Saints, but you were like the third string for a few years, and then now you're out of the league? Well, what if you could compete for the next 40 years still at a high level and have fun doing it? Like that, but maybe they're not wildly money motivated because maybe they got a contract and they're good, right?
Yeah.
Like, you got to either be insanely competitive or really money motivated, preferably both. And if you're neither one of those things, I have less than zero interest working with you in sales. We're not going to get along. You're going to have to find some guru kumbaya bullshit to work at and sell. It ain't going to be where I'm at. I can tell you that. Yeah. It just won't work. We won't jive well together. I don't know how to motivate you because I can motivate people that aren't wired the same way as me. But if I'm a Mac and you're like not even a PC, you're a speak and spell or whatever the fuck it is, I'm not going to be able to motivate you, dude. I'm not it's not going to work. And you're not probably going to be a fit the way that we have everybody else aligned on the team,
Well, yeah, that's a huge point. You have to have alignment. I think to like tactical takeaways, I hate giving advice. I always feel weird when I give advice because I feel like I'm just figuring things out still. But one thing that I think I've done well is like, if you're going to run a sales and revenue team and you don't know who the humans are, right, that work for you, if you don't know why they want to make money, being money motivated is one thing. But if you don't know their why, if it's to buy a Lambo, that's fine. You just need to know that. So then like you need to know how much they need to make. If it's to adopt a kid, preferably that's even better, right? Because then that's going to fit with culture even more. I want a Tesla Cybertruck really bad. I also am adopting a kid right now. I'm doing both. I also know that like I want a Cybertruck just because it's cool. I don't want a Lamborghini. I haven't ever thought that one was as cool. But everybody's got their thing. So if you're just basic human psychology, if you're going to build a team, you need to know why they want money or why they're extremely competitive. And if they're competitive intrinsically, some people, mostly entrepreneurs, are just like, I'm have to accomplish something all the time. And that could be attributed to all kinds of reasons. They might not even want to compete against their peers. They're competing against themselves.
Yep.
Same concept though. And then two, if you don't construct it in a way where you can be, and I don't know, like if you're a sales leader, maybe you can't do this at your company because there's people above you in HR and all that stuff. But if you can't be open about what you believe in and who you are, they will never tell you who they are. Yeah. I think that's what's wrong with a lot of corporate cultures these days is people aren't comfortable talking about what they actually believe. And it's not politics or social issues. It's just like, generally speaking, everybody's pretty tight-lipped. That's changing, but that's like table stakes. If you can't tell them who you are, then why would you expect them to give you their why? And that's like the two fundamental things I would say is like tactical. Know their why and make sure they feel comfortable telling you because you've told them yours.
I like that a lot. I've got a few questions. So first off, have you test driven a Cybertruck yet? Do they even have them up there? I mean, I've seen people say like this is the first one in Texas. You're not in Texas.
I'm in North Dakota, dude. I don't think I know anyone who has one yet, but I keep seeing them. I saw Elon on one of the interviews said that they're going to they've sold 1 million of them or 100,000 of them. And they're going to sell 1 million by the end of next year or something. And I'm like, I gotta be one of those.
Well, have you driven a Tesla yet?
Yes.
So I've owned 2 Teslas. So I had a Model S and I had a Model X, and the Model X was like the performance, dual motor, and everything like that. Man, they're fun. If you're trying to do road trips with them, they ain't there yet. But if you're staying within an area and you have,
I just wanted as my commuter
outside of my house, like it was cool. You could park and it's like a gas station at your house. But they're fun. They drive really fast. Even when you're doing like a really small, like kind of like road trip, maybe a couple of hours, like the self-driving it's the best. Like I've owned a lot of cool vehicles. Those were the
I think it's like just getting close to, like Elon said the other day, is like people don't realize that 3 million cars are going to drive themselves by the end of the year. And people are just going to be like, this can't actually happen. He goes, you'll think of it like a train. You just hop on and it takes you where you want to go. That's what his tweet was. And I'm like, that can't happen that soon, but apparently it might.
So I saw someone, because it's applicable and I happen to see it, someone in my live said, how does one become competitive? I don't want to be competitive because it will only disappoint me. Which is funny because I think short term that would be the fear of being competitive if you're someone that's not, right?
You can lose. Right? You lose more than you win.
Lose. But the long term is that if you don't play, then the only option is to lose. You don't even get the option to win.
That's the Michael Jordan line right there.
Yeah, and that's kind of like my dad's mindset was like that. Like we'd go to like, the state fair and they'd say like, you can't win if you don't play. And he'd be like, yeah, you can't lose either though. And that's like, it was kind of funny, but it's also like, that was like his approach to life. He never really played, never really tried.
Yeah.
And he never got kind of anywhere. Generally the big life lessons I got from my dad is what not to do, not what to do. And when it comes to being competitive, I think it is something that people are like intrinsically dialed in on. Sometimes it's because of toxic stuff where it's like you want to validate yourself by competing, for sure.
Yeah, you want to prove it all the time because you had a bad childhood or whatnot. I'm sure that's 50% of it.
But to me, it's just fun. And like, it's fun. Like, even if you gave it everything that you had and you failed, then all that means is like, all right, like I know I tried my absolute best. Maybe this isn't for me and I need to find something different. That's a positive too. But if you never tried, you might stay in that thing that is never going to be for you and say, well, tomorrow I might, maybe, I don't know. It'll disappoint me if I fail. But then like you'll go through your entire life never trying to be great at anything. And I don't know. I just think that's a shitty way to go through life.
I don't think people are as afraid of failure as most would believe. I think people just are afraid of failing publicly, right? I think that everybody in their mind can rationalize their behaviors and like, I gave it my all. I can feel good about this. They just are so worried about what other people are going to think of their failure. And like, as an entrepreneur, that hits home for me. Like, I have built Rocket in a way, but it's taken 3 years to get to the point where like, failing at this point is just getting smaller, but I don't like, there isn't an option to go to zero anymore. There was for 3 years. And it was always like, people would ask me what I did for work, and I'd be like, oh, I work at this shipping company, and then move on. If it was strangers or if it was my uncle, I did not want to talk about it, because then if I built it up and told them all the cool stuff I was doing, and then 2 Thanksgivings later, they were like, well, how's that going? And I had failed. I didn't want to have to face that. And it's failing publicly that people worry about, not failing.
Yeah.
It's opinions. And it comes from the same thing. If I compete and I lose, does that actually affect you, or are you worried what someone else is going to think of your competing and losing? That's probably most of human nature.
I love to do the opposite, man. I mean, we talked about this earlier in the morning meeting, asking everybody like who's their favorite musician. Kanye West is my favorite, has been for years. Beautiful Dark Twisted Fantasy is my favorite album of all time. Kanye will talk some shit into existence. Like he says big things that he's going to do. People look at him like he's absolutely out of his mind, and then he proceeds to do it. You know, like, I'm going to be a billionaire. It's like, dude, come on. Russell Simmons isn't a billionaire. And then it's like, look at Russell now. And Kanye became a billionaire. He did. I mean, I don't know if he is anymore. Listen, being self-destructive also comes with everything else that is a good thing, right, with him. But I like that. It's like the ultimate form of accountability. I did a piece of content on TikTok years ago where I was like, no, I'm going to tell you exactly what I want to do with this and what I'm going to do. So if I fail, you guys can hold me accountable to it. And dude, sure enough, someone replied to it like a year later. They must have sent a reminder, and I saw it. And they're like, hey, man, just check it in, seeing how things are going. Luckily, it had continued to grow the way I said that it would. But it has slowed down, and I started to become more introspective on that. And it's like, man, well, I stopped being loud, and I stopped being so confident in everything. And I got like imposter syndrome. And like, we might be getting a little bit off topic, but I would say that this is helpful shit, where it's like, dude, like, it don't hurt to like just be like, nah, I'm going to do it, and I'm going to tell everybody. I don't like, because you see the alternative advice everywhere, right? And I say it in that TikTok where it's like, it's a video of like the Peaky Blinders guy, and it's like, you need to move in silence, never let anyone know what your next move is. And it's like, I'm gonna tell everybody what my fucking moves are, dude. Because like, who cares, dude? Bruce Lee can tell everybody how to do all of his moves, but they still couldn't apply it the same way. So I'm not worried about someone stealing the secret sauce, but I want to talk this shit into existence. Like, the more I talk about it, to me, the higher chance that it's going to happen. I'm not big on the secret, but I do think that works.
So here's the thing that I get hung up on all the time, and it's a personal flaw of mine that I'm working on. I don't think that I ever can give advice because I don't want, and I think it's a Midwest thing. We just don't brag, right? But I've always been a bit braggadocious, right? I like to say, hey, I'm going to accomplish something, and then I go do it. And so I have proof to myself that I can go do it. But I never like to give advice. I feel awkward doing it. Like, hey, here's what I think. And I'm like, I'll only speak on things that I've all the way figured out. But then I will sit there on Instagram and TikTok, and I'll listen to people I do not know. And I have no idea if they're successful or not. And they'll say something. I'm like, that was really smart. I'm going to apply that. And then I go, wait, why am I listening to a stranger if I wouldn't as well give advice that I think is good, even if I haven't figured it out yet? And then you realize, if you break it down, everybody sits online and listens to strangers about motivational quotes or how to do something or YouTube tutorials. But then they're like, well, I can't give that advice. I can't be that confident. I can't tell people I'm going to accomplish something. What if I am wrong? It's a weird, and that's just my own thing, but I think a lot of people identify with that.
It's funny for you to say that, because I think when I say that, I feel like, well, no, I'm probably just selling myself on the reasons why I'm not an expert at something. But like, around, if you were to ballpark it, if we want to get specific, around like how much revenue did Rocket do last year? Like,
ballpark 40 to 50 million.
40 to $50 million. Right? How old are you again?
30.
30. All right. Yeah, dude. Like, it's the top 1% of 1% of 1%. I'm not trying to glaze like the kids say, but you've done shit that like most people will never do. And the other thing, it kind of comes full circle on what we're talking about now. Like, this could probably be 2 podcasts, really, is a lot of people just don't think that it's physically possible to be able to do that. They wouldn't even know where to start, which is like, I want us to, in future episodes, to start like more going towards that like angle of things of like, all right, dude, you were in sales and then like you decided to just do it on your own. Like how? I think that's the helpful part with people because there's so many salespeople. They might not be in freight, but they're like, man, I don't want to work for someone forever. And then it's like, all right, well, like just because that's how you feel might not mean that you're going to build a business that is doing 40, $50 million a year in revenue. By the way, you tell me if I'm off. We're going to do like way more than that this year. I mean, we're whipping ass so far. Like
Yeah, way
I
more.
would assume that it's probably not going to be close. And we haven't picked up way more people. We're doing more with the same amount. We haven't added a boatload of sellers. We have the same sellers as we did last year. You know, like
We haven't added
we haven't grown at
anybody.
all.
We have fewer employees this year than last year, and
That's
that's like
crazy.
I've been trying to. That's the code I'm trying to crack is like how to get to 100 million with 40 or less employees.
And to wrap it up, culture
And
side, right? You talk about building a great culture, and I believe this is a great culture. How many people do we have in the HR department here?
0.
We don't have an HR department.
Yeah.
So you want to build
we
a
have
decent
people
culture?
that deal with people, but
Rip
we
the
do not have
HR
HR.
department out of the company and boot them over to, coloring books or whatever else they're qualified to do. Like if you can. Because, dude, I will say that, like, they wreck everything that they touch. I've never seen an HR company.
They have
be a
nothing
net
better to
positive
do.
on anything ever. Like
HR departments have nothing to do, so then they sit there and come up with things that could go wrong, and then they make sure all the employees know that those things could go wrong, and then they create an environment for people to want to report people, and it's a false incentive. I mean, when I say HR too, I mean like human relations.
Right,
I do
right,
not
the real
mean like
HR.
onboarding and payroll and
That
admin.
count.
Like we
Yeah,
do have
yeah.
people that do that, but that's mostly done with apps, Gusto and
Yep.
benefits providers. And there's a lot of tech around that. I have 2 people at the company that when somebody is having a tough time, whether their performance is bad or they're in a bad emotional state, I go to for my people person to help them. But I have never had an HR and will never have human resources as a department at Rocket. It's a waste of space. And it also, and I've heard this on the All In podcast. So that's why thank you to All In podcast for talking about this. So I don't feel so scared, but I mean, it's really just a waste. They just sit there and look for people doing something wrong, and they create an incentive at Google. If a meeting has, X amount of people, one person from HR has to be present. How do you create an open culture if that's the case? And then Gemini AI came out and said the founding fathers were a different race, and you couldn't get a picture of a white person, and they taught the AI the wrong way. I guaranteed there was engineers at Google who were like, guys, I don't know if you noticed, but like I think the AI thinks that it can't show white people or it can't show this, and so like it overcompensated for the DEI.
Right.
And so everybody said, don't say a thing. Nobody say nothing. I'm not getting fired over this. And that's what happened. And then the launch went, and Sergey had to come out and be like, hey, we're going to try again. But that's like at a macro level, what's wrong with HR. But at a micro level, 1, it's expensive to hire people just to police people. And 2, if you have a good culture, things will still happen. You just deal with them as family. I guess that's back full circle. If somebody in your family wrongs you or says something they shouldn't have, you approach them in a professional but emotional way and say, hey, I didn't appreciate that, and here's why. You don't have to tattletale to HR. There isn't an HR. And I might be way wrong on that. You can sound off in the comments if you think that that's a stupid strategy, but I'm going to win on that strategy, and I'm going to say it right now. HR is going to be eliminated in most companies.
To me, like, HR's never done a positive for me in my life anywhere I've ever worked at. I could list a lot of negatives that they've done. I can't give you a positive. And I think a lot of it is like, and I look at it sometimes legal departments, particularly in sales this way, they need to do something to justify the fact that they work there. So even if things are going perfectly, then what do you need the HR for? Yeah. And then it's like, well, if we move the goalposts, then like I can justify what I'm doing. We've got a deal right now that is with general counsel. It's a decent sized deal. We don't do fine print or contracts. So if you look at our contract for our TMS, our software, it just says on there, all right, here's the terms and conditions. We don't have any. We
Yeah.
give us
If you
60
want to
days
stop
written
using us,
notice.
just give us 30 days, please.
Right. So nothing would ever need to be with general counsel for longer than maybe 5 seconds. They'll take a look and be like, oh, there's no issues here. We have an easy out and there's no upfront cost. And okay, yeah, but you need billable hours, right? And you need to
Yeah,
justify the fact that you do what you do. So here we are. We're
exactly.
still
And
waiting to hear back, you know?
yeah, I think that at the end of the day, and I think I just switched cameras, but that's all right. At the end of the day, if you put an employee in any department and you don't give them anything to do, they will find things to do. It's human nature. Most people, even with remote work culture, won't just do nothing. They'll try to be productive. And that's the problem with HR. You only need all small businesses, mid-sized businesses should just have an employment law attorney at a local law firm. Make sure you have good employment agreements. Don't do non-competes, none of the shenanigans. But then if you have to fire people, have severance packages. Make it clean. I've learned the hard way on that as well. And then have people at your company that have a very high emotional IQ and can, say, hey, someone seems off on this meeting. I'm going to go connect with them one-on-one. And we actually at Rocket have created a culture of like the leadership sees things and goes to the employees instead of the employees bubbling it up to us. And that is, again, I know that was a little off topic, but it's culture. HR
It
is
absolutely
culture.
is. Yeah.
And so that is another fundamental difference about Rocket is that we don't have HR, besides the fact that we have admin and like those HR functions, but we do not have a company that has like HR watching over everybody's shoulders. And that's risky. Again, if you're willing to take the risk and treat it like a family, even if you have to fire them later, and not have HR, even if that might open you up. And that's why we have we have an employment law attorney. And also, we're just good people. What are we going to do and say that would make us liable? And incorporate your business in North Dakota. Good idea as well. But I just think that at the end of the day, if your entire focus isn't on the people and the culture, then you're building something for no reason, because it's going to eventually be either a corporate blob or a failure. And the only chance you have is the people that are with you. And all problems are people problems until they're not. And all solutions are people. And every piece of revenue, every process you set up was made by a person at your company. And if they know who you are, they are aligned with your incentives and goals, and you have one common culture, again, the happiness advantage, but one layer lower. Why are they happy? That's how you succeed. So there you go, guys. Rocket revenue on culture. But doesn't culture matter more than just quota and dials? Because if you get top sellers, how do you keep them? The next episode, I think, is going to be the one we start going, Barter. Like, how would somebody who's listened to this 17 episodes now, and they're like, hey, maybe I want to start a business, or maybe I want to like step out and be a sales leader. Let's get real tactical for a couple episodes. You're a sales leader. I started a business. You also started a business. We got plenty of experience in it. Let's not be imposter syndrome. Let's tell people what we think. Maybe it'll be valuable for somebody. Appreciate you guys listening. Sound off in the comments about HR, please. I'd love to hear your opinions. We'll see you.